Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Heart of the Cast. Another guest, another person to join us. First of all, with me, as always, is Josh.
Hello.
And today, we also are hearing from... Syracuse.
50 subscribers!
There's a small delay there, but it got him in.
I thought you were gonna introduce me. I didn't know you were just gonna let me go.
I was hoping you would do your own thing, but that works just as
That
good,
was
honestly.
a pretty good thing, I think.
I'm surprised we didn't get another one of those video at every 50 sub integer. Is there any reason you didn't keep up, or is it exponential?
You know, I should have at least done milestone numbers. Like when I hit 300k, I probably should have done it. And each time I hit a milestone, I should have had to hold that progressively longer. So I'd have to hold the woo for 10
yeah,
seconds.
okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, 300k.
So maybe when we hit 350k, I'll just upload a 6-second video of that just for fun.
I was hoping it would be a little bit more tailored to the numbers, right? So 50 to 3, that's a big jump. Maybe like a 10-hour loop or something.
10-hour loop. Yeah, I'll just edit it and I'll just have it just constantly going. Yeah. Then people can just have that. They can fall asleep to it. When they fall asleep to the 10 hours of war sound.
Falling asleep to Cimo screaming woo.
Well, they already do it for the Secrets of Eternity thing. So what's the difference at that point?
Yeah, so I mean, ladies and gentlemen, we've got Alex on. We've got Mr. Cimo himself. It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast. Pretty highly requested. So we've been doing the rounds through the content creator sphere to bring different people on for relevant subjects. Your relevant subject just being you. So we don't really have we don't really have what's the word? Itinerary per se of where we're going to go with this direction, but I have a vague idea of what to talk about and what things are relevant. But we could probably start somewhat chronologically. For those of you who, and I guess I actually don't know the origin story too much, but you could share a little bit about how you first started with the game and progressed into starting with content creation.
Yeah, sure. So starting with the game, I started like every Yugi boomer who grew up playing this game. I'm pretty sure I was being watched by my babysitter, and to try to distract me, because obviously I was a treble kid, she just threw on Yu-Gi-Oh! And I saw the first episode and I'm like, I'm in. That was it. And so yeah, then just started collecting the cards. I have this fond memory of, I think my dad bought 4 packs of Pharaoh Servant. I think they were blisters or something like that. And I pulled 4 ultras in 4 packs, which was pretty sick. It was Call the Haunted, Ceasefire, Chain Destruction, and what was the 4th card? I think it was Fiend Mega Cyber. It wasn't a good card, but Call the Haunted was pretty sick. That was cool.
In 1 pack?
No, across 4 blisters, 1 ultra in each blister. Which for blister packs, I mean, that's insane.
Yeah,
that's streamer luck right there.
Yeah, for real. So it started, it started back then, and then as for
are blisters still a thing, by the way? Sorry.
Sure.
Are blisters still a thing randomly? Because I know in America. So. Yeah, okay, so I think it's the most unbelievably American thing ever. But you have one booster pack inside a pack, inside a cardboard thing, and glued together. It's just I hate the environment turbo, but that's one pack. That's
control.
Yeah.
That's how you buy your single packs.
Anti-theft prevention. So.
Oh, is that what it is?
Yeah, it's so people can't just take a pack, open it, take the hollow out, and then just leave the pack on the shelf. So the
also, I guess, just makes it bigger, so you can't just it doesn't fit into a pocket or whatever.
Yeah, and also because the blister packs have the cutout to be able to put them on the rack, because you can they hang on the little rods typically. Right. So you can't really do that with a booster pack. So I think I've
seen plastic with that at the top. I've seen some games have that. I think.
Okay.
They just have the hole in the plastic on the top, but yeah.
Yeah. So so then I played all the way up until Teledad. No, I didn't even get to Teledad. I got to Dad Return, and that's when a lot of Yugi boomers quit the game, just because it became so price prohibitive to actually play. If you wanted to try to play competitively, you just got completely stomped. And then I took
You would have been a young teenager at the time, I guess, right?
Yeah, yeah, I was. So that would have been 2007, 2008. So I would have been 13, 14 around that time, depending on like when I actually quit. And I didn't have like a ton of money for cards. I actually, this is when people still formed like the little teams and stuff. What we had like one guy on our team who was like rich, so he like lent us cards. So I was able to play Perfect Circle at like one of my first regionals, which was cool, even though I couldn't afford the cards. But I practiced as if I had them. I had like proxy like index cards and stuff. So that was cool. I'm happy I got to play that like in like a competitive space. That was
What
fun.
was your team called?
Oh, I don't remember. It was so long ago.
Really?
But I remember the guys. It was John and it was TK. Those are the two guys that. And John was the rich one. He was the one who had all the money. So he just like lent us everything. It was great. So then I took a 6-year hiatus. Basically,
I gotta get more lore here. Sorry. Do you still talk?
Sure.
Do you still talk to them? Are you still in touch?
Oh,
with them?
no.
Man.
I mean, basically, when I stopped playing, John and I went to school together, if I recall, in like, because I would have been 11 or 12. So this was like, we went to school together, like elementary, middle school, if I recall. And TK, we met through playing Yu-Gi-Oh! And so, yeah, it was a very like short frame. It was like only maybe like a year or two that we had like this like team going on. But then once I stopped playing, we sort of just stopped talking because like I didn't really talk to my Yu-Gi-Oh friends that much anymore. That's just like, this is pre-social media, right? So unless you really like talked on the phone or texted, they lived in like complete other parts of town, so we just didn't really like hang out that much.
Do you want to know what my team was? Well, I wasn't in it, but it was like the local like team of our area.
Shoot.
Shadow Dragons.
Shadow Dragons. Ooh,
OG,
edgy.
OG team names. That it feels like that. It feels like the same thing as when people have like these old email addresses that they are like not very proud of. Because we had all those. We had like United Pro Gamers or what's it called? What was the first team that we had in our area? I think it was called like Skillers United or something like that. Some crazy
Skillers
stuff.
United.
Is that like broken German English translation? Is that what that is? Or
Yeah.
Skillers.
It was like all very skillful. Yeah. Skillful people.
That's great. Yeah, so go on. Where did you go after you quit? I suppose. Did you play something else or?
I got like sort of into competitive Halo / COD. Our team for that was Team 777 because we're in Vegas and like 777 on the slot machine is like
Okay.
So like that was a cool little name. So I had a small stint in that, but it was mainly a combination of just gaming. That's when my UC kind of started too. So like I was just like not feeling like doing anything. And then school primarily. I was just like kind of focusing on life stuff. And it was neat because I had a friend, Rod, who I met in high school, who also played. And he knew that I played, but I didn't play anymore at the moment. But in high school, at one point, I ended up giving him most of the stuff that I had that I didn't like sell off already. I just gave him everything else. And then he ended up moving to California, which is adjacent to Nevada. And eventually he's like, hey, you should like get back into Yu-Gi-Oh! This is like around Dragon Ruler format, I'm pretty sure. And I'm like, I don't know. Like, it's I just got a lot going on. I wasn't thinking about it. So then he ends up sending me an entire Blue Eyes Exodia Turbo deck, like just for free. He's like, just get back into it. Just have some fun. And I'm like, okay. And so I went to locals and I went like 2-2 or something. I resolved Exodia like 5 times. So I'm like, okay, I'm probably hooked back on this again, even though I was playing.
That sounds like a pretty good time, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean,
not having played for so long, that seems pretty above average experience wise.
Who doesn't like resolving Exodia, right?
Yeah.
In Dragon Ruler format, no less.
Yeah. So I had the deck. I wasn't like playing all the time, but like, if I had the itch, I could go and play and such. And then eventually I just sort of decided to get back into playing, not Blue Eyes Exodia Turbo. I was like, okay, maybe I should actually learn to play like other decks. And so this is when I start scanning YouTube, because at this time, YouTube is very popular. YouTube was already very popular in the gaming space, for, Halo, COD, any sort of like larger video game IP. And so that was usually where, as growing up during this era, we would sort of flock to learn more about anything that we're trying to learn about. And so from there, I noticed that there wasn't really a lot of like Yu-Gi-Oh! YouTube content. All that was really out was like MCOL40, CapG,
Vexicus
Lithium,
4666.
Vexicus. Yeah, like just some of like the OGs that you remember from the older days of Yu-Gi-Oh! YouTube era. If it wasn't one of those, you had people just like posting random deck profiles and or like openings, and that's like really all Yu-Gi-Oh! YouTube was at that time. And so I'm just like, well, okay, if I'm gonna get back into it, my degree was sort of in like public speaking, communication, stuff like that, because this was like early college years. I thought I could make this more entertaining and also like teach people some stuff about the game who like are also like me trying to get back into it because maybe they rekindled their love for the game. And so so I made that fucking Grand Mole video where that's where Tech Tuesday started. That's the first video. And yeah, it pretty much just went from there.
So what format
was
were
that
we?
about?
Yeah, the Tech
Sorry?
Tuesday.
What was the first one about? I'm not familiar with it.
Oh, sorry. So the first video was about Neospatian Grand Mole in Geargia format, or a format that had Geargia, I think.
Oh, you're just like highlighting a certain tech card that you think people should pay more attention to, sort of.
Yeah,
thing?
it was just
Okay.
it was just sort of like a gimmicky 3 to 5 minute thing where I'm just like, oh hey, like there's this cool card here, are like the top current decks, and like here's like some cool interactions that you can do with this card. It wasn't necessarily going to be like a format breaking card, but it was just something that like watching around of like the during that time, I'm like, oh yeah, cool. Like this card, it's pretty good if you can like stick a Grand Mole, you stick a Grand Mole, right?
Yep. Did you do a Tech Tuesday on featuring a kaiju at any point? I feel like you did, right?
I don't know if I retired Tech Tuesday, but if I did, it was maybe about Gamma Seal.
Yes. So
Gamma Seal was one of the first ones, wasn't it?
yeah. So I don't want to call you out or put you on blast too hard, but I remember one specific Tech Tuesday. You said that Gamma Seal is a good tech because it can out Vanity's feed.
Oh, I did? Oh, that's hilarious. Yeah, we were never always right in those videos.
Be careful with those callouts though, because I remember an argument at 2014 YCS Madrid with Eugen, where he made fun of me because I said like we were talking about playing Super Poly, and I said Super Poly can out Vanity's Fiend. And then he made fun of me. Then he made fun of me for that. And then in the tournament, I actually Super Poly'd the Vanity's Fiend because I negated it beforehand with something. I forgot what it was. Like I may have like Veilered it and then Super Poly'd it or something like that. So it actually did happen. So
that's
Josh,
funny.
What is it with you and Super Poly? Just saying.
I don't want to talk about it.
To be fair, if we were playing by prog rules, I could probably get away with Gamma Sealing a Vanity's Fiend. So
I did not make a construct with the Vanity's Fiend, though.
Yeah, okay. Great. I'm sure some of you still remember that reference.
It was a win, though. Thank God.
So content creation-wise, I mean, we can probably skip ahead a little bit. I mean, I personally see you as like, which is weird because despite the fact we started, I want to say our first YouTube video was maybe uploaded in like the same month because I also started it around that time. I think your first upload was 2014, which is really cool because we've ran parallel alongside each other in kind of different ways. But I've always seen you as like the innovator of content creation, at least like maybe after 2017. I think maybe you started really popping off was like Master 04-ish, right?
Yeah, I want to say,
because I mean you went full time before that.
No, that actually might have been around the time when I went full time because I started YouTube, like you said, in 2014, and trying to think. It's been so long. It's been 10 years now, so it's like it's
you guys,
a lot of it.
You guys have been out here for a long time. I'm just
a long time. So I graduated in 2015 from college. And then I got a job almost immediately out of college, but I hated that job.
It was sales or something, right?
It wasn't sales. It was like project management. And it was one of those jobs where like you're good at the job and you figure out how to like just make everything automated and efficient. And because of that, they just like pile 3 times the work on you for it. And so I'm like, great, I'm making myself do more work for no reason.
That's the worst part of the corporate industry, isn't it? Because like you almost get punished for being too efficient and too good at your job, but not rewarded. So
No. Precisely. And so to be fair, my incentive structure was like sort of like if you had more work, you theoretically were like better off, but like it was
Okay.
there was a huge discrepancy in like the amount of extra work you received versus like how much you actually got like rewarded for it, if that makes sense. I will say it was a fine job to have. It wasn't like I it wasn't like I was like miserable. Like it was like fine. But eventually the company like just went under and got absorbed by another company, and like everyone saw the writing on the wall, but no one was like doing anything about it. It was just like we're all on the sinking ship. And so I'm like, all right, I'm out. Like I need to take care of this. So I just wanted to do something else. And so I woke up every morning, recorded videos with no lighting. I used my natural light from my window, so I always had to record in the morning when the sun came up. Uh Filmed, went to work from 12 to 9, came back, edited the videos, went to bed at like midnight. And I did that for like 2-ish years. And then finally, the revenue from YouTube ended up passing like what I was making at my job. And so I'm like, well, I'm doing this part time and I love it. And I'm working full time and I hate it. So the decision seemed pretty clear at that point just to say, screw it, just go YouTube full time. So I think what you said, Nadir, yeah, I think it was like around 2017 that I made that decision. And then, so if that's like when I popped off, that's probably why, because then I went full time and I was producing like 5 to 6 videos a week versus the 2 to 3 that I think I was producing before.
Yeah, and I I think that for your older content, quote unquote, it's feels like there's been a huge shift in your channel. Like the dynamic has been almost like TV like series type of thing. There's always a new episode every day on X day of this series. But before, you were really into the modern competitive game. You were usually keeping up with the meta, doing breakdowns, and I don't know if tier lists were a thing, but you were definitely doing like very specific current format competitive discussion videos. And I guess you kind of just stopped at some point and shifted away. What's that about?
Well, there's this little thing that happened called COVID that completely killed competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! So when my whole business model around competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Completely shatters, I had to pivot. And so I tried to like keep propping it up because this is before Luxury started doing the online stuff. This is before remote dueling was a thing. I hosted the Crush Card Cup to like, because everyone was just like depressed about COVID, and understandably. So I'm like, okay, like I'll give people a competitive outlet to play Yu-Gi-Oh! So I hosted a 512 person event by myself, and that was like that most hellish 2 weeks of my life because I had no help with that.
Wait, you didn't have
So that
like
was fun.
scorekeepers or
Oh
anything?
no, I
like
did
that?
everything. I did everything. The only thing I had help with was I had a co-commentator co-commentating the matches with me, but everything else I did everything behind the scenes. That was a
Pairings,
nightmare.
reporting.
Yep. Everything.
Are you
Everything.
insane? How was that even?
Yes, I am.
I couldn't have done that.
Yeah, it was
That's wild.
it was unfathomable, but at the same time, like it was multifaceted, right? Because it was good because it gave me content for one, and two, it was good because it gave people an outlet to play Yu-Gi-Oh! In like a tournament setting, which we weren't able to do. So did that, decided I was never doing that again because that was just like a complete disaster. And
What
then
was it hosted again? Was it like over the course of like X number of weeks, or was it just like a full 2-day or 1-day event?
no, it was over multiple weeks. So basically,
Yeah,
I
okay.
made like a group on Facebook or something, and I invited everyone into it. And then
Facebook.
people had a few days. I think I gave people 72 hours to play matches,
Yes, I remember
and then
this.
just
Okay.
like and then report their scores, and then I would log the score in Challenge, and yeah, we just went from there. And then if there wasn't a determined winner, I would just, if one person was responsive, the other person wasn't, I would just make the person who was responsive the winner, and we just kept going. So it was.
That's a little easier than I thought initially, I guess, because it's over multiple.
It's still a lot though.
It's still everything
for the
yeah,
amount of
absolutely.
people.
Yeah, it's a lot of
Yeah.
work, but it's like better than doing it all on one day and live and all that.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. Doing that all in one day, I don't think I would have survived. Yeah, so again, we didn't know what was going to happen to competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! At this point. You have to put ourselves back like in initial COVID. Like we didn't know what the world was going to look like a few years from now.
Mhm.
And so I remember like I was just brainstorming ideas, and I think Gage also, I think Gage was over because right before COVID, YCS Vegas 3v3 took place. And I remember because Konami actually had like gloves and masks to hand out to people at the event, but everyone just like, this is fake. Like, there's nothing going on here. So all the staff are all like gloved and masked up, but no one who was actually playing like cared because everyone thought it was just like this non-issue essentially. So it's like looking back, it's like, wow, great. YCS Vegas 3v3 2020 was probably like, a super spreader event, but we didn't know that at the time. So Gauge was over for that event. And I remember we were in my room and we were just kind of like spitballing ideas for like other content that we could do. And this wasn't even like as a direct result of COVID, because again, it hadn't gotten bad enough that everything had shut down. Because again, we went to the 3v3, right? It was literally the weekend before everything shut down. And so we were just like talking about like ideas of like fun stuff we could do for content that, maybe not necessarily is competitive or not. And that's when we started talking about like RuneScape content, because both him and I love RuneScape. And then there's a series going on, or not this series, but there's just like a game mode in RuneScape called Iron Man where you have to do everything yourself. And then there's also the series that we were watching of two content creators, like they built fresh accounts and had to do everything themselves. And they'd play for, I think, 4-hour increments at a time. And then wherever they were at the end of 4 hours, they would fight each other. And then someone would like get a reward for winning. And then next episode, next week, they'd play for another 4 hours, progress the accounts further, so on, so on. And so we were like theory crafting, like, how could we do that? Because we were hooked on this series. And so we were theory crafting, like, how could we do that for Yu-Gi-Oh? And so between the two of us, we basically just conceptualized progression series right then and there. And then we just decided to run with it when COVID happened. And we're like, let's just try it out and see if it works. And so we just filmed the LOB episode, and people were like, especially I think because everyone was just so down, because like people didn't know about like what was going to happen with their jobs or like with their life, or like if they could see their loved ones, different things like that. People were in like really dark places during COVID. I think it was just like this sort of like beacon that all like the Yu-Gi-Oh community was like, this is just something like refreshing to get my mind off of like the shitty stuff that's happening in my life right now. And it just exploded. People loved the first episode, and then that was, I think Prog's almost 5 years old now, which is crazy to think. But yeah, that's sort of the Prog.
It's still only in season 2, right?
Yeah, still only in season 2. We just passed halfway, I think.
A lot of sets,
Yeah, when you add side sets, it becomes a much longer series, but it's been fun. It's been fun.
I think the for sure one of the most monumental like shifts or milestones ever in Yu-Gi-Oh content creation is absolutely progression series, which I think is a massive like undertaking and just an accolade on your shoulder, right? Because I think it was I used to, when I could watch it, I had a great time. And it was just this spectacle. It was this event. Like I would have regularly like 3K plus viewers tuning in live every Monday to watch like the Prog.
Joseph still does.
It's incredible. It's what, and I think the most interesting about it specifically is like it's this innovation that happened over the course of like taking from elsewhere, which I think is probably the best way that just as an idea and design thing, a lot of like good ideas and creativity spawns from.
The yoinking twist.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that's like, they always say creativity is just taking two good ideas and just like combining them together, right? So it's like Yu-Gi-Oh and RuneScape essentially, and that's the inspiration. Like it's the running joke now, but it's like that's the inspiration for a lot of my series, is that it's like stuff that I watch and I'm like, okay, how can I Yu-Gi-fy this? And then that's where like Masochist came from, and that's where like other things come from. And they may not be as like prolific as Prog, but they still are like, people still love them in their own respective right, because it is like a unique take on Yu-Gi-Oh for one reason or another.
Yeah, and it's still going strong, but further than that, you began essentially, I guess, that shift away from competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! I suppose we should maybe talk about now, because from what I understand, you've basically quit.
I still follow, like, especially when the 3v3 in Vegas happened this year in 2024. We were all prepping to play, Snake Eye or Fire King or some variant of it. And I love Fire King. Like, I think that may be the first deck profile on my channel if I go and look back. If it's not the first, it's one of the first. Like I always just loved the just like the art style and the lore and everything behind it. And mechanically it's like kind of fun too. You know, you're blowing up your own stuff, getting value. And so like when they announced that like, you know, they have, you know, actual good Fire King monsters for once, because like they all suck relatively. It's like, oh, like Sacred Green Garunix and like Baby Ponix. Like these cards are all crazy broken. I was actually really excited to play you know, Fire King Snake Eye. But then they announced the Retro 3v3, and immediately Gage, Joseph, and I just said, screw the main event. We're playing in the Retro 3v3 because this sounds way more fun. So I'm basically a boomer at this point. Yeah. I still follow,
who had to play GOAT?
I had to play GOAT. I
Oh,
became the
man.
GOAT person. I actually carried us. The other two, they like crashed and burned. So I was very proud of the fact I was able to play GOAT.
What format did you put Gage in charge of?
Gage was actually Edison.
Oh, I thought Joseph was the Edison.
No, Joseph was Tengu. So we let Gage pick Edison because we thought that was where he was going to be strongest. And he was grinding. He was like top 10 on DB before this. Like he was going. And then again, he just burned out when we actually had to play. And then Joseph and I were going back and forth between Tengu and GOAT. I don't think he wanted to play GOAT. I was kind of impartial. So he picked Tengu. And I'm like, well, I guess I'm playing GOAT. And I actually had a lot of fun really diving into competitive GOAT and like learning like Chaos Turbo, Warrior, stuff like that. I think just because I like old Yu-Gi-Oh! Some people might say that, you know, GOAT's like this S tier format that's like broken and all that stuff. And yes, it is, but I think it's still like nostalgic for me. Like I just like being able to play like, you know, Breaker and Gravekeeper Spy and BLS. Like that's my childhood to me. So I think it was fun to like relive that, and almost took me back to like playing these cards in my locals. So I thought it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, this whole retro format, the development is just really, really cool and wholesome. And it's like, especially it just came to my mind because it also happened like this last weekend at German Nationals. There's a lot of people traveling to these tournaments just for those events. They're not even entering the main event anymore. And you even see like I meet people all the time that I haven't seen for like 15 years or something, because they heard that now you can play old Yu-Gi-Oh again, right? And I think it's really cool.
Yeah. I really wish Konami would like promote it more, because I feel like they could just keep continuing to draw large crowds for it. But I don't know. I guess we'll see.
I think that's the next step to promoting alternative Yu-Gi-Oh! Outside of the current advanced constructed only real way to ever play Yu-Gi-Oh! Is the promotion of some kind of Time Wizard format. And
yeah,
the biggest step forward to that will probably have to be a YCS or something equivalent of a Time Wizard format is the way it would have to go, I think, right?
I would go.
Essentially.
I would definitely go.
I think a lot of people would go, especially if it was like well promoted so that people would know. Because I think that's the biggest issue now with the Time Wizard events, is that sometimes they don't even make posts that they're having an Ultimate Time Wizard event at a YCS. I think people like us now know that every YCS has an Ultimate Time Wizard, but I know so many people that are like, oh my God, I didn't know there. I live in, you know, Indy or Raleigh or whatever, and I didn't know they were doing this. I 100% would have gone. Yeah. And so it's something that I feel like just by promoting it more, that it would draw more people. So I don't want them to like shoot themselves in the foot with this opportunity here. I think they're taking notice because they're obviously reprinting like Edison cards
yeah.
and like they're reprinting Raikou and Hamster and Substitute, and so it's like clearly they're aware that there is a demand for this here. I just want it to keep growing. Magic has alternate formats that they do large events for all the time. I don't know why Yu-Gi-Oh can't be the same.
I am just I am laughing at this idea in my mind of like this opposite day where you have this like Edison YCS and there's like a Snake Eye side event or something like like that's like everything.
No one would go, man. No one would go to the.
They'd be like struggling to fill up an 8-man Winamat of like a Snake Eye current format.
I also did play in I also did play in tier 0 format too.
What did you play? Did you play tier?
Tier? Yeah, of course.
What was your thoughts and how did you like it?
Loved
I
it.
suppose. Yeah.
I loved it. It was fun. Yeah, I was it was exhausting because I hadn't been to an event for a while from that tournament. But I remember like seeing tier in the OCG, and I just remember thinking like this seems like so much fun to me. I just loved how interactive it was, even though if the games went on forever, but like I loved it. It was really cool. I think it was a really fun format. And so I'm happy I got to play in it. I think I was kind of happy to like one and done it. And I was working with oh my God, who was it? His name's escaping me, but he did the person that I was like testing with. He day 2'd, so I was proud that like all our testing didn't go. I think I went. I think I dropped after like round 6 or 7. So like I didn't do too great, but whoever the Sir Eminon, there we go. I can remember his name. Sir Eminon. I was testing with him. He made day 2, I'm pretty sure. And so I was happy that our testing, didn't go to waste.
God,
But I played an Ishizu tier mirror at German Nationals this year, day 2, after I lost. And it was actually surprisingly fun. I was like, okay, at the time I got kind of tired of it after a while, but now after playing it again after like over a year, I have to say that was pretty fun.
Is it like how people whip out 2 boxes of goat decks? Like you just have people like whipping out 2 tier decks?
Exactly. No, that was this one guy who was
Exactly.
just like, I was sitting there with someone playing some Edison, and there was this other guy saying like, hey, I also have I have 2 Ishizu tier decks if you want. He also had 2 Dragon Ruler decks, so we also played that a little bit. That
Oh,
was
that's
pretty fun
fun.
too. Yeah,
That's cool.
that was pretty cool.
Should have done a cross ban list of both of them. See how that would go. Is there some like bullshit you take out of that stuff? Because like remember Necros, like people would play historical Necros, be like, okay, let's not play with Jin or let's not play with them. Is there anything specifically like bad you take out as a dweller?
For Ishizu tier, I don't think there is anything. I don't think at the high level, I don't think Dweller is that big of a deal. And I think for Dragon Ruler, we just played without emptiness. That's it.
By the way, Sir Eminon, is he the what's it called? The Ritual Beast connoisseur? Was he like really obsessed with Ritual Beast?
No, I think he was really obsessed with.
Because I remember Eminon coaching me
Luna?
on a deck. That was
Luna
it. Oh, yes. Some kind of beast deck. Gosh,
Yeah.
I remember he taught me Luna Tri Brigades in the very early part of Macedo because I was doing like a max rank free to play guide or something, and he actually built one of the decks for me. How is he? What's he been? Is he still playing?
I don't know. I haven't caught up with him too much. I think it was similar to me where he also hadn't played in a while, and I don't know how I came to hit him up, but I was like, hey, I think this would be really fun if you and I just like grinded tier together. And he's like, yeah, let's do it. And that's kind of just how it came together. But like ever since then, like we haven't like touched base too much. So it was this weird like flash in the pan of like, yeah, let's just hang out kind of thing.
That's really wholesome.
He's
a very cool guy.
Ishizu tier and then not talk again.
Basically, that's literally like what happened. But then continuing on the like the competitive stuff though. So then like you're asking or you're mentioning like my pivot away from competitive. I mean he's here, so I think it's pretty fitting. But like people like Josh like just sort of came into the fold then and just sort of essentially filled that gap for competitive content in Yu-Gi-Oh! And so I don't really see a need to go back to competitive because I mean, first of all, I was never really like a competitive, figure at all. I sort of just looked at myself as someone who took a bunch of data and just presented it to people and gave my thoughts on it. More of like a sportscaster on like ESPN or something, right? I'm not like the best player by any means, but I can give people data in a nice, presentable fashion. But if someone like Josh or Jesse or people who are actually good at the game are going to do that, then that's much better for the community because it's coming from people who actually know what they're doing. And so I don't really see a need to have to go back into competitive at all. Like the void has been filled.
I think there's always like room for what's the word? You're not necessarily like the teaching role, but just as you said, right? Like the ability to present that information and the breakdowns and rundowns of what to expect in the future.
Sure.
Just ongoing current discussions and stuff like that. You never had a desire to like do that kind of stuff again? Because that's, as you said, that's what your content was and what you were known for was like recapping and going over the current format and stuff. You don't miss that at all, or?
I don't mind it. I think a lot of my analysis was like very like elementary, like introductory style of stuff, which is fine. I think I sort of identified that there was,
which is why you were so popular, right? Because
because I sort
of.
Yeah, I sort of like segued the like casual to like, get into competitive. And then if you're looking for like actual like good competitive content, there are other people that you could go to. But again, just my ability to synthesize the information to present it well, I think that's what a lot of people really enjoyed. So I don't necessarily like I'm not against going back to it. I just don't feel like there's a need for it. Like I liked doing all like that sort of content, but I also really love just making these like Netflix style series shows because I think they're like really fun, and that's just what I've been enjoying. And I think one of my biggest philosophies with YouTube has always been just do what you really enjoy doing. Like yes, there is still you want to make sure that people want to like watch what you enjoy doing, but I think there's a balance there, and I really love doing all the series type stuff.
Yeah, and it's been working really well, and you've done a good job of it. So, kind of.
And Josh is doing okay, on the competitive side. I hear he has a few subscribers now, so.
I'm doing all right. I can't complain.
More than 50 subscribers.
Yeah.
What's next, I suppose, in terms of, I guess, content creation or competitive, like, you've got your current series ongoing. Is there something in the works you want to hint at all, or?
Always got stuff in the works.
Okay.
There's a few ideas that there are like half baked. Nothing that's like, crazy. But I've had like plenty of ideas where I've like had stuff recorded and I just never upload it because I just don't think it's gonna work well. So that's just the plight of the content creator. But nothing that comes to mind that's like, ooh, I can like spoil anything. Because it's like stuff that I haven't really like it's like missing something where I feel like it just needs like one element added and then like I feel like it'll be a good idea to execute on. But now for the most part, just always stuff in the oven.
Master Duel Arena was genius though. I love that so
Oh,
much.
thank you. Thank you. Both of you were great guests because we got to do some well, in Nadir's case, we got to play some of the worst Yu-Gi-Oh! Imaginable.
For anyone listening, that's not the gameplay he's talking about, okay? Just saying.
And then
Format
in
did you
Josh's
guys
case,
do?
we drafted the entire Master Duel card pool, which was
God.
horrific. I would not recommend it.
Yes.
I used to try and do
I thought it was entertaining though. I thought it was entertaining.
Yeah, for sure. I was trying, like, I used to, at least, like, in DZ used to do it a little bit as well, where, like, whenever there's, like, a new, like, bundle or something, we would try and open packs and stuff, but I think, like, generally, it's just doesn't end up being that fun, especially if you try and repeat it, because, like, I think Yu-Gi-Oh's biggest problem is, like, so many cards don't work together. Like, so many cards, right? Yep. And I think that's, like, a big issue with the game that I'd like to hopefully have alleviated at some point, because it feels like criminal almost that there's this many cards in the game and we just don't get to utilize them in different ways, right? Like, see, whenever there's like a new card that comes out on YG.org, for example, and you read it and it's just like, oh, this card is very like subpar. But maybe in the context of like draft or something, it would be insane. I don't know if you have any passionate opinions about alternative formats or alternative ways to play Yu-Gi-Oh.
I feel like I'm a bit mixed on this because while I agree with you, Yu-Gi-Oh was never designed that well. It was designed that way initially when cards were super generic, but then the problem was, as we saw in early Yu-Gi-Oh, the decks just become super homogenized because then it's just okay. I'm going to play a pile of the best, 40 cards that are legal at any given point. And obviously, as Yu-Gi-Oh expanded and added more summoning mechanics and went more archetype based, starting with Gladiator Beast, getting into Blackwing, so on, you were able to sort of like have more defined strategies that incentivize you to play certain cards. And I think that's sort of why Edison is really popular as a retro format, because it's like more diverse compared to something like GOAT, where yes, you can play a lot of decks in GOAT, but a lot of them are still like, they're a lot of the same cards in the decks. But I also feel like that's almost like strictly like why a lot of people like playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Is that there are so many different archetypes and decks to play, even if they're all not necessarily like the best decks, right? It just gives you a wide variety of different flavors to tickle your fancy. I wish Yu-Gi-Oh was more draft focused. Like I think it'd be fantastic. Like we saw people loved like Battle Pack draft for YCSs when they did that for a short amount of time.
Oh yeah.
But unless you custom curate the card pool.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I don't think this is ever gonna be a reality for Yu-Gi-Oh! In terms of like just the main booster sets are just gonna be draftable because simply put, without rotation, they just have to be way too careful with like archetype restrictions.
Yep.
Archetype restrictions and stuff like that. And like unless like I think Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a game that is you can have super fun draft or cube rounds. You just have to like set the card pool in advance and like basically make your own packs for it, quote unquote, like what for example like something like Master Duel Arena emulates. and then it works great, I think. But like I don't think main sets are ever gonna go that way again.
And to Josh's point too, like for Master Duel Arena, like I custom curated all of the Goat and Edison card pools. Like I had to
Yeah.
go through all the cards and basically pick like, okay, which one of these are like actually playable slash draftable and which of these are just like impossible to play. And like,
Yeah.
yeah, like even now I'm still tweaking it. Now that I have the data to see like what cards people are picking, what they aren't, I can actually remove cards from the card pools to like make it so that the decisions are a lot tighter between certain things.
Yeah.
So it's tough. It's really difficult. You really have to custom curate that experience for people.
Do you have any criticisms or anything about the game itself that you've got toggling in your mind? We're kind of just like in a yapping phase now because I just want to talk to you about chronologically of everything, but I'm just bringing up like random topics, I suppose, for your discussion points to get your takes on some things. And I think usually talking game design is like generally the best way to just kind of understand how someone views the game and stuff. So, I guess just general thoughts on like current competitive Yu-Gi-Oh, like not necessarily like the format per se, like specifically because those change month to month, but
Sure.
you know, in recent times, like how's it been for you?
I think it's interesting because since I filmed History of Yu-Gi-Oh, I got to really like get intimate with understanding like all the formats and like see how the game progressed. Even with that big 6-year hiatus I took, I got to revisit those formats and like see the good and the bad of what I missed. And even with more modern stuff, even though I haven't been posting content, I still like follow things. So like I still am in the know with stuff. I feel like historically, I feel like where Yu-Gi-Oh started to take a downturn, and this is just my opinion. I feel like when they started attaching like omnis or things that are going to make it that the opponent can't play the game on generic extra deck monsters is where it really started to go awry. I'm talking things like Shockmaster and such, because then all of a sudden you now have this like win con that depending, regardless of what deck that you play, as long as it can achieve that that win con, then the decks sort of blend together and all just become piles to like make X card, right? And so I feel like as Yu-Gi-Oh aged, we started seeing that sort of crumble and become more and more of an issue when we start getting multiple of these cards together, right? When we see these cards that have like multiple Omni negates and the opponent literally just can't play the game because there is like 7 to 8 Omni negates on the field. And sometimes, you know, if you're super lucky, you can crack through a board like that. Like maybe there's a board breaker like Super Poly or Dark Ruler or something. But those, I mean, Dark Ruler came a lot later, to be fair. So I feel like
to fix that issue,
to fix the issue precisely. And so I feel like Nibiru is also, I guess, another one to an extent because it sort of like prohibits it. But anyway, so I feel like what I'm trying to get at is when Yu-Gi-Oh started making these design choices that made going first make it so that it created these non-interactive games that were non-games essentially. I feel like those, when you look at historically the formats that people hate the most, that's like the reason why people hate them so much. Like Dragon Ruler, for instance, like Dragon Ruler is really interesting because it's, you know, the boards it's making, right, are like, you know, maybe a Draco sack or two or something like that. And then like if they super rejuve, like, yeah, whatever. But still, like you have this interesting back and forth with a deck like Dragon Rulers. And a lot of people might think, oh, Dragon Rulers is like this, you know, one of the worst formats ever. I would disagree. I think Dragon Rulers is actually like very interactive and there's a lot of like skill expression in that format. And it actually does a lot of things right.
I do have to ask you though. I mean, I think it's one thing to say a deck is like fun and skillful, like when it's played against itself. But do you think playing anything other than Draco, other than Dragon Ruler, was like, you know, fun?
I think there's advantages and disadvantages to that argument, right? Because some people like the tier 0 environments or like the tier 0.5 environments if you want to look at like Spellbook as being a, you know, counter, even though that was like an example of like summon thing to make it a non-game example.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like that's kind of the issue.
But, sure, but like in some instances, like that can be really fun because then it's like, okay, if two players are going against each other in a mirror match and their decks are 99% equal, then it's like, okay, like who's actually the better player here? And I think from a skill expression perspective, a lot of people enjoy that. I would say the majority of people prefer a more diverse metagame where there's at minimum 3 to 4 decks that are viable because people like choice. People don't like being pigeonholed and only playing one deck because it's the best deck. So I think it depends on like which player you're asking that question to, like what their response is going to be. I personally feel like I like having like like a triangle format or a deck or a format that's going to have like 3 to 4 decks that are like all decent. Maybe have some like tier 2 stuff that's also playable. I think that's just what most people prefer, and I also like that as well. I like choice, and I think a lot of people do as well.
I feel the
I
same.
tend to agree
personally.
with that.
Yeah.
I see as a competitive player, I do see the advantages of like tier 0 formats. It always depends on the exact format you're talking about.
Right.
Like some tier 0
Right.
formats I liked, some I didn't. But in just like generic argument is always like, okay, well, if there's not that many decks, you know better what to prepare for as well, and that usually benefits the players that know what to do with that information, right? Like if I know
Right. Right.
it's a tier 0 format, I know what deck I need to beat if I'm going to a tournament, and if I can make that happen, then that's good for me. But I tend to agree that like a couple extra options is probably a very good thing if you look at the community or for the game's health as on a like at a whole. It's like it's better if there's a couple different decks. I personally don't like it if there's too many, but something like I'm thinking like toss format level of diversity, that
Right.
kind of stuff, where it's like 4 decks the format is named after, and maybe there's like a couple other decks I don't remember that were like semi-viable. That seems like a kind of sweet spot to me personally. Um
Right. Or even like fire water format / Gear Gia ish, right?
yeah,
There was
yeah, that
like
sort of
several
stuff.
decks during
Yeah.
that time too.
Yeah, exactly. That sort of thing. Because I like going back, like I said, the same thing with the Ishizu tier earlier. It's like going like it's always a matter of choice. Because me playing that tournament, me playing that format on like the Sunday of German nationals because I want to, right? That's my choice. I don't have to go and do that. Um, but if I enter a tournament during the time, I don't have a choice. Like I have to play that deck, right? Now I can go back and play it as a retro format whenever I feel like it, but I don't have to. So
Right.
I think that's what makes it feel a little different.
Yeah.
When you say like 3 or 4 deck viables and stuff, I'm curious like why you think that specifically. Like, what's the difference between 3 viable decks and 20? Like for you personally, like why is that a bad thing? Because I'm on the opposite end of this. I think the more decks, the better. Um,
Okay.
I think from a competitive standpoint, maybe that's not ideal, but I love when people have choice, and I love when people get to express themselves through the game, and I think it's a huge important factor. And I feel like if that creates worse gameplay, for some people, I think overall it creates more enjoyable gameplay for a larger number of people. But
I
that's just
think
my view.
I think because you specifically said like competitive, I say 3 to 4 just
Mhm.
because
Well, even from a
from like
competitive
side decking.
standpoint, like why do you agree or disagree?
Well, just because I feel like, especially when you factor in side decking, like players at a competitive level do like to have agency and control over it, like as much agency or control over their like wins or losses as they can, right? And I think once you start to get beyond like 4 or 5 decks in a format, then especially with siding patterns and such, it becomes a lot more difficult to account for things that may be so much out of your control. I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing because we've seen in the past when some people come to a YCS with like this off the wall rogue strategy and do really well because they catch everyone off guard. That's good. I think that that's fun and it's entertaining because then it makes for this fun story that, people talk about throughout the ages, right? Um, but I think I'm just using Edison as an example here because like that's where my competitive side is right now. Edison pretty definitively has like 3 or 4 decks that are like better than everything else. And so you sort of account for those, but there's still like 10 to 15 like tier 2-ish decks that people play and they're still decent. And if you're like not prepared for them or they just have a bad matchup or you have a bad matchup versus those decks, then like you just get clocked. And that's just part of the game that you have to account for. So I think having like again some degree of control when you go beyond like the 4 or 5 decks, I think it becomes like further and further out of your control. And just as much as people don't like tier 0 formats because it's only like one deck, I don't know if Josh agrees with this, but I think if you have too many decks, it's almost like the same problem because now you just like have like almost like no control in that regard.
Hmm.
I do agree with that. I do agree that too many decks from a competitive standpoint can sometimes feel like a problem. It does depend a little bit on also what those decks are, because I still like when you say Edison, I do think of Edison as a super diverse format that isn't bad by any means, because like games are slow enough and decks are like there's enough agency in the gameplay itself that I feel like you can beat anything in Edison with almost any deck. Like there isn't many decks that have like super unwinnable matchups out there. It's kind
Right.
of like balanced overall. Whereas then I'm thinking like a diverse format that I don't like or that I didn't like is like 2022 like Nationals format with like Sword Soul, Despia, Flu, Adventure piles, and like you name it, other all the other decks, right? Where like yes, there was a lot of different decks where nothing was really better than or like nothing was like the best deck, but all the decks were kind of trying to do the same thing, which was like floodgate the opponent or combo the opponent to death. Like, you know, like this deck had shifter, this deck had D-barrier, this deck had anti-spell, so on and so forth. The scythe lock was a huge topic in that format still, right? And I think that is one important factor is like if all of the decks are quote unquote like cool and healthy, then I'm fine with a lot of different decks. If there's a lot of different decks, but they're all trying to do different toxic things, then you know that it doesn't matter if it's one deck trying to do that or 20, like that's gonna suck, right? And so
Yeah,
yeah, but from a viewing perspective, I can definitely see the advantages of a diverse format. You know, like
I
I'm
agree.
in that spot now whenever I stream like a YCS, and we like watch it together, like having different decks on stream every round is like it's super exciting. Like from
Yeah,
that perspective, I 100% get it. And that perspective is also important for the health of the game, right? Because that is basically the image that the game portrays to the viewer, which is like attracting more people to it. So like overall, I think it's really important that like tier 0 formats don't happen too often, and if they happen, they don't happen too long. Like for me
yeah.
personally, they'd probably be okay, especially if the mirror match is cool. But I think for the overall health of the game, which is also very important to me, I think it's better if they don't happen very frequently and not very long.
I think Toss is also a good example, though. You mentioned it earlier because, like, yes,
Yeah.
there are like 4 definitive decks that are like the best decks, and there is like of those decks, I would say probably any Thunder pile's probably like the most unfair, just because it plays like Colossus
Yeah.
stuff. But to like what Nadir's saying, there are other decks that like were playable during that time that weren't necessarily doing like any unfair things, but could keep up with some of the like top tier 1 of Toss. So that's like an example of like I thought that that was fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
What are some of your favorite formats or eras of the game?
Ooh, like that I've played in, or like just as or just generally.
I guess
I mean,
playing in
kind
would
of both.
be important,
Yeah.
right?
Sure.
Because
Or like, I mean, just like the one you've maybe your favorite one that you've played in, and then maybe your favorite one that you've like revisited and wished you could have
yeah, two
played at the
different
time, or
parts. Mhm.
Sure, that's a good one. Hmm, favorite one that I've played in. Uh,
Well, just while
I
you're
would
thinking.
say.
No, sorry.
Oh,
Go
sure.
ahead.
Yeah, you go first. You go first. Yeah, if you know, go for
I
it.
was
I'm
just gonna say
curious.
while you're thinking about it, I was gonna put out. Always have this answer ready. My favorite era of Yu-Gi-Oh, without a doubt, is 2014, late 2013, no, early 2014 up to Link Summoning. That's like I see that as the real golden age of the game. I think it's an amazing sweet spot that had a lot of interesting deck building, but not completely so archetype. What's the word? Focused in
Centric.
some ways. There was still like
Mhm.
a lot of piles around that time, and I think the game was slow enough that it was also it felt like it was not so first turn centralized. I mean, some decks definitely were throughout that period, but I don't think it was. I think it was more of an exception than the norm. That's my answer personally.
Are we talking like beginning of like Fire Water format
Yeah.
2014? That sort of okay. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's a pretty good one.
What about you, Josh?
I've played them all. I do.
All of them.
No, I find it hard to put my finger on like one specific format that's my absolute favorite, because
Well,
I'm the
Paleo.
kind
Or
of
time periods,
I do think my favorite, if I have to pick one format, I do think I'm picking Paleo, like the 60 card one.
Yeah.
But I'm the kind of person whenever I'm like in a certain situation or when I'm playing a certain format, I really like to focus on the positives in that format. So that I can appreciate a lot of different formats for like their positives, right? Like
Sure.
kind of cards that I find cool or interactions that I find really fun or certain matchups that I think are super intricate, right? And I don't focus on like, oh, well, this format sucks because Maxi was still legal or that, or like Edison format sucks because I don't know, brain is legal or whichever, or oppression, right? Like that sort of thing.
Sure.
That people often do when they like play a format, and then every format has negatives. Like every single format that you can ask me about, I'll find stuff that I didn't like at the time.
Name one bad thing about this
So
format.
about this current one,
I'm joking.
no, I can't think of anything. Like no, actually, you got me. Yeah, okay, this one I can't think of anything. So yeah. I guess it's this one then.
No, go on, finish your point.
Oh, yeah.
Me?
Yeah, go.
Oh, I was done.
Oh, all right, okay.
Oh,
Fair.
I
okay.
think.
I think for me, I think it's probably between two. I think it's either Raging Tempest Zoo format or probably like Trickstar Sky Striker format. And that might seem weird because that was like around when like Goki, like hand rip everything was legal. But like more so like after the hits. I think with Trickstar Sky Striker, I kind of like that it just felt like an older Yu-Gi-Oh deck where you're just like really trying to just like get a ton of value, like, you know, Candina +1s, Kagari or Shizuku +1s. And it's just like it felt like this like controlling style of like just sort of like out resource your opponent type of deck. And so I just really like that deck. I'm not like particularly sure why. It just the feel of it just resonated with me, and so like I rocked that for a while. I also almost topped with both of these decks, which is probably why I'm like partial to them too. But as much as people say like they hate Zoo format, I feel like Raging Tempest Zodiac format was like really, really fucking fun. This is before Ash Blossom was out. This is before Masterpiece was out. This is before Chakanine was out. Like you just had
Wait, that's
Borbo,
the
Tiger
60 card
Mortar.
one, right?
It was, yeah, because Grass came out in Raging Tempest too.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that I just feel like those Zoo mirrors I felt like were really fun and interactive. Just the only part about that format, Josh said there's something about every format. Dimensional Barrier, I feel like ruined that format. But that aside, I feel like if you remove Dimensional Barrier from it,
Yeah.
I feel like it was a ton of fun. I had so much fun diving in and learning those decks.
You seem to disagree with your groan there, Josh.
He was playing Paleo, that's why.
No, I don't disagree necessarily. I just don't think it was as bad as like when you look at Dimensional Barrier nowadays, you'd be like, okay, yeah, it's like very obviously that card would ruin a format, but I think the format was like slow enough to where like a turn skip wasn't
Sure.
as big of a deal, right? Because it's like, okay, well,
Sure.
you're not gonna summon a Trident this turn. And you're not gonna get like a Broad Bull Surge or whatever. Like, I don't think it was as powerful. Like, because all the decks in the format at the time were relatively slow. Losing one turn didn't matter as much as it does nowadays, right?
That's true.
It's kind
I
of the
think it
same
depends on your
thing.
Okay.
Hmm?
I was gonna say,
No,
I think it depends on how much non-engine you had to like defend yourself at that point. Because I feel like if your
yes,
hand
yes.
was engine and then debarrier turn skips, you're just a sitting duck. And if they establish, then your crackback potential is basically non-existent. Where
it
if
was
they debarrier
definitely
you
very
and you have like strike plus, I don't know, like chalice, or you have an ogre in hand or something,
Yeah.
right? At least you
Yeah.
can like fight back. So while I agree to that extent, yes.
It was definitely a good card, which is why everybody played it, and so
Of
it
course,
did win
yeah.
some games. I don't think it was overall as problematic as you would look at it nowadays. It's kind of comparable how, from nowadays perspective, you look at a card like Maxi and you would wonder like, how was that ever okay, right? But then like you talk to anyone who's played like from 2011 until 2014-ish, and like most of the time Maxi was like, it didn't ruin any
It
of
was
the
like a
formats.
side
Like,
deck,
it
if
was
anything.
fine.
Well,
Sometimes you didn't.
crazy.
Yeah, sometimes you didn't even main deck it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's crazy because Maxi was semi-limited during that format, and this is probably the only time you'll hear me say this. I actually think it was fine in that format. I don't, because you could just like slap down a Trident, they get a draw, and it's like, okay, like you can basically counter their card with your Trident for the most part. So like it didn't matter.
That format had Zoonoid or something, right?
Yeah, Infernoid Zoo was also popular.
Yeah. So
That was
the
cool.
basically the release of Grass kind of made and because there was no Ash yet, you could
Yep.
build some really wacky stuff where you would like you would be guaranteed if you had like left arm offering to get the Grass and resolve it as well.
Yeah, Billy
So
beat
there
me
was
with
some
that on
pretty
the bubble.
wacky.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You lost to Billy on the bubble?
Yeah, it's a feature match. It's online. You can find
That's
it. Don't. It's terrible. I played like I played awful. I was so like I'm on the bubble for the first time I had a
yeah.
chance of topping. I'm playing against arguably one of the best players in the game, and I'm on stream. And it was just the first time I was on stream too. And you think being a YouTuber that wouldn't be a big deal, but I think because it was just all the pressure, I collapsed. I was just like not in the right mindset, so I got waxed. But it's okay. It was a
American
really cool
YCS
experience.
or was it Prague?
No, it was YCS Seattle in 2017. Yep.
People always say that. I think I've won like one feature match ever. I think I have like a 1-4 record or something. I get really nervous on feature. It's so terrifying. But for Josh, it's just a Sunday, I guess, or something.
No, I still get nervous. I still
Really?
get nervous. Believe me. Yeah, I don't think the entire like getting nervous thing it doesn't really stop ever. At least I haven't experienced it yet. I think in certain situations I just deal with it better than others because I'm a little more used to it. But I still definitely
Sure.
feel the nerves, and sometimes they do still get to me.
Yeah.
Mm.
I think I'm
Like
0 for
I would
5.
still say I'm like 10 times more likely to misplay in a feature than like in a non-feature.
Oh, I believe that. 100%. Yeah, I think I'm 0 for 5 in feature matches that are on the bubble. All of my feature matches, I'm not sure why, but Michael always likes putting me on feature.
He just
Whether
doesn't
it's
want you to
written
top.
or I don't know. Maybe he does it, but it's every single. It was at the UDS and it was at 4 different YCSs. It's happened, and I'm just like, oh my god, unbelievable. But maybe I'll break the streak one day. Who knows?
Mm. In terms of content creation, you mentioned Konami there. I mean, I don't know if you want to go into too much detail here, but have you worked with? I know you had like a little bit of a thing, like a video you made like a few years ago, but I don't know. Have you ever like tried to work alongside before, or is it just not your kind of thing? Or
No, I think Konami does their thing. I do mine, and that's. I think that's just how it is.
it would just it wouldn't be plausible. I think you'd have to like upend basically all of your content, right? It just wouldn't be
Pretty much. I mean, especially just because of some of the restrictions that they place on like what you're allowed to do and not do. I mean, Prague we still play on DB, right? So like that would be a huge issue. But
buy
we
the
could convert
cards
to
and
Master
remote duel it.
eventually. Yeah, exactly. We could do that too.
Just
Which
buy a
we did
box of
actually
every
think about.
set.
We thought about doing like initially when we thought about Prague, we thought it'd be cool to do it in real life, even though it would be obviously really expensive. But obviously Gage lives on the opposite side of the country as I do, so like that's not really feasible. Even like with remote duel, technically you could do it, but I don't think that's like very spectator friendly. We thought about doing like a 25th anniversary special where we just went through like the 6 sets that they came out. Like that'd be like a nice little short thing to do. But
you know, ever since COVID, I don't think remote content is that bad. Like, if you have like a good setup, like proper camera and stuff, like and you work with someone else to make that kind of I think it actually looks really good. I mean, it's like watching a feature match, right? You are watching a top-down camera view, right? I think the what's the word? The grass is there to work on, kind of thing, right? Like I think it's possible. It's just I guess it's a lot of work and effort and money as well, of course, to like ever use old sets and stuff like that. Is
oh sure. I think Team APS
My,
does a series where they buy the old sets, and I'm like, that's
really?
crazy. Yeah,
I
like
do
I don't
agree
know.
that there is a lot of potential with remote duels, though. My personal issue with them, content creation wise, is not the not that I think it doesn't look good or anything. It's more so like the actual process of playing remote is like a lot. I don't know. I don't know if weird is the right word for me, but it's so like I'm not used to it. Like I feel
Yeah,
like
it's
I play a
different.
lot worse when I do remote stuff because like looking at a screen is just not the same and so on and so forth. I don't know.
Hmm. It's weird
Yeah, it's
because
like it's missing that like human connection. I don't know.
it's really
Something's
interesting.
missing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a social game. But it's really interesting that I think like remote is like one of the biggest ways to play like One Piece or something right now, right? I think that's like their
Really?
yeah. I think like remote dueling is some of their major
Yeah,
tournaments.
they do have in-person tournaments in all the Bandai games, I think, but they just kept doing it like from after like I think they just got a lot of positive feedback from doing it during COVID, and they just like said like why would we stop now, because there's still a lot of people who don't want to travel or can't afford to travel and really like playing from home. So we're just going to keep doing it, because I mean like from the organizational part it's like a lot easier than hosting a YCS or something in person.
Mm.
So I think they still have in person events, but they just said like this is a good concept. Why would we get rid of it? And I think that's like not. I mean, Yu-Gi-Oh does the same too, though, right? You still have remote duel like regionals.
I think just NA, right?
Is it just us? I'm not sure.
Maybe
I
yes.
can't think of any EU remote events personally.
Yeah. Well, that's a general problem, though.
I wasn't gonna say
That's not
it.
just regionals. Yeah.
Do you have any
Also,
thoughts
though,
on? Go
One
on.
Piece, though, I feel like, I mean, Bandai in general, they need to do anything they can to like get people from the big three, right? So if
Yeah.
something's working, like you
Yes.
said, why would they shoot themselves in the foot? It's like, oh, good, we're getting all these people defecting from Yu-Gi-Oh, for instance, which is that's a hot topic right now.
I was gonna ask you, do
Yeah.
you have any thoughts on the whole Yu-Gi-Oh's dying discourse? I mean, we've been through this before.
Here we go again. Yeah, I know.
Infamously.
Yeah. I think it's not so much a black and white issue that a lot of people want to make it out to be. I think my analysis is on the surface, Yu-Gi-Oh looks like it's doing really well, right? Like the numbers for attendance look really good. There's all these positives about Yu-Gi-Oh, but when you start to like dive in to like the dark underbelly of like what's actually going on, there are like some structural issues like with the fact that EU hasn't had events since I was there last December for Bologna. They have not had an event, which is insane to me. I guess they've had
Yeah.
their opens, I guess. I don't know
Yeah.
if
We've
really
had
want to call that.
nationals just now, which is like
Right,
that's basically like a
right.
given that we have those every year, but we've basically have missed 2 YCSs
I was about to say
that
it
we
was a
should
given
have
that you
had.
had YCSs though too. So
Yeah.
um so like there's that, and the fact that yes, like the competitive people are sort of defecting to One Piece or Lorcana, but to be fair, okay, we've seen this happen before with Dragon Ball and other games where Bandai comes in, flashes a bunch of money in front of people, and then when people are like maybe partially fed up with the game, they go over and play because the prizing's better, and then eventually, like what happened with Dragon Ball, they just like dried up on the prizing and stopped giving people like 10x their money for entering an event. And now all of a sudden people are like, oh, I don't want to play Dragon Ball anymore because this game sucks. And we're going to go back to playing the good game, which is Yu-Gi-Oh. Bandai also notoriously like kills all their games in like 2 years. So I don't know if like you want to invest like your time and everything. Like sure, in the short term, if you want to like top some events and make some good cash, great. Long term, historically, Bandai doesn't have a great record. Lorcana is a bit of a different beast because Ravensburger doesn't really have a track record in the TCG space. So they're also a bit of a wild card, and the way that they've sort of handled the game thus far has been a bit rocky. But the difference there is I feel like Disney's a really interesting IP because it appeals to groups of people that I feel like normal TCGs don't, just because it's Disney, and Disney has infinite money. So if they want to keep pumping Lorcana as much as they want, they can, and maybe that is enough to convince people to switch. So I don't know. There's a lot of things at play here. I feel like even though like a lot of the discourse is, Yu-Gi-Oh's dead, all this stuff. I saw Herman going off on Twitter. That was hilarious. That was a good way to wake up that morning to see him ranting. But
I'm just laughing at the thought of you waking up, checking your phone, and that's the first thing you see in the
that's
morning.
what happened. That's literally because like
That
usually
is
he'll
so
make like
funny.
a tweet about something every now and then, right? Like he's not vocal, but like he'll say stuff every now and then. But literally, it was like the wall of Herman tweets just going in, and I was like, "Oh, this is a great day." Herman's great. Herman's great. But I feel like at the end of the day, the casuals are what make up the majority of the player base, and as long as like they're content and they're still buying product and like continuing to make Konami like infinite money, the numbers look good. At the end of the day, the competitive scene is the minority, and I know it is like the optics of the game more so. I don't know. We always talk about how like events get run at losses and things like that because they're just like loss leaders for the product basically. It's really hard to say like how much of it like really matters in the grand scheme of things. It's tough.
I
What are your
personally,
thoughts? I'm curious what you guys have to think.
well, my opinion generally is that, like, especially when it comes to the recent like price support kind of topic and stuff like that, I've always been of the opinion, and maybe that's like a very I don't know, like I a privileged take is the word I'm looking for, because I personally I haven't really cared about like the price support as much. I've always been of the
Sure.
opinion that like you should not pick your hobby based on like return on investment type of thing. Like I don't view like the way I'm spending my free time as something that I need to like make money from, right? That's
Sure.
what you go to work for. And if you think that this game is the most fun out there, then I don't think you should be like playing a different game because their pricing for top 32 is better or whatever, right? Like
Right.
if you think Lorcana is fun or One Piece is fun, by all means go play them. I've played them both a little bit. I think they're both fun.
Sure.
They don't really like replace Yu-Gi-Oh for me at all, but if you enjoy them, then I'm not saying you can't play them. Um but I think this is basically not. And I've had this opinion like always, ever since, like even when I was in school or whatever, and I didn't have the money to buy like a Teledad deck or whatever. I was still playing Yu-Gi-Oh. I wasn't playing Pokemon because their decks were cheaper or their pricing at locals was better or whatever. Um, I just feel like it's a hobby, and I think those kind of like, I think the critique is fair. I think the pricing could be better, but I think like switching games or picking your hobby based on that is not how I want to like like I don't think that's the best way to be happy, is to just like pick your free
Sure.
time activity based on the money they make. I don't know.
I don't think to push back a little on that. I'm not like I
Mhm.
think it's like two different kind of issues. Like Yu-Gi-Oh! Is dying is like issue A, and then you have issue B
Mhm. Yeah.
of price support. Are they
Yes.
are they linked and are they related? Could potentially be for some people, absolutely, but I don't think it
Mhm.
is for the majority of the player base.
Yeah, and I
But
would agree with that too. Yeah, because like the
Yeah.
majority of people don't care about the price support, like in a practical, like that's just the truth. The majority of people that play Yu-Gi-Oh don't really, that's not really an issue for them, right?
yeah,
Like the fact
exactly.
that like a
Yeah.
YCS winner doesn't get like whichever how much money they would, like that's,
I
for the
th-
most people that's a non-issue.
but I
That
what
argument's basically. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Nadir.
Well, I just think that while yes, you shouldn't be picking your hobby based on financial return and stuff like that, I think that a lot of people just want to feel somewhat like their time is respected in the sense that they don't need to give out crazy cash prices. They don't need to do any sort of arduous, insane revamp and money pump of the game. They can
Mhm.
just do what other games do, right? Like you can make special rarity cards. You can do things that essentially are completely cost neutral to what they're already doing, right? Instead of a mat, you could just have special rarity cards. So I don't think a 32 person card of like a unique full art Ash Blossom would be difficult to produce, etc., right? So I don't think it's a case of like that's going to kill the game. I just think people want to feel like there's growth and there's feedback being taken upon. Because when I think of the discourse of Yu-Gi-Oh! Is dying, back when we had this discussion in 2060, it was like a ludicrously, like just incorrect, stupid argument that just made no sense. Nowadays, it's definitely not dying. That's an exaggeration. But what I will say is, I'm fearing that there's some stagnation. There hasn't been anywhere near as much growth in Yu-Gi-Oh! In the last couple of years, other than Masado. Um, compared to Pokemon, and compared to especially One Piece. But obviously One Piece is a new IP, so naturally it's gonna have bigger growth. But especially compared to Pokemon, like Pokemon since COVID, like Yu-Gi-Oh boomed in COVID, every TCG did, but Pokemon is like dumpstering Yu-Gi-Oh in terms of its like revenue share of the market space and all that kind of stuff. Um,
Yep.
so I think it's not a question of dying. I think it's just like, okay, how can we get a little bit of a boost out of the stagnation. It feels like, because numbers are
Sure.
good, but they're not growing. It just seems like everything's like fine to some
It's just a
extent.
matter of it's not dying, but it could be doing a lot better, right? Like there's just
Yes.
things that I mean, something doesn't have to be dying for you to want to improve it, right? Like you can make very
Right.
fair critique points for Yu-Gi-Oh, and I'm sure there's a lot of stuff that they could improve on. That doesn't mean the game's dying. I don't think it is, but I definitely agree. And I also do agree with the thing you said before that of like players in terms of price support, like wanting to be valued. It's definitely something I felt like before, right? It's the things that I said were just that's the way I deal with the situation, right? Is like I tell myself, well, it's fine because I enjoy this hobby so much. I don't rely on it like paying me back. Obviously, it would have felt nice, and obviously, I've had people like compare it to other card games. I've seen the comparison to like, oh, what does like a Magic Hall of Famer make? And like I would be like, well, if I was this good, if I was as successful at Magic as I am at Yu-Gi-Oh, I've had basically have if I had picked a different uh game, I could have been doing so much better, right? And obviously that stings, right?
Right.
So I do definitely see that argument. It definitely makes sense.
Like price support,
So,
I think is very simple. Sorry, go ahead, Alex.
oh no, it's okay. Well, you finish first.
Yeah, I mean, I just think price support is like the easiest fix, right? Because it's just such
Yeah.
a like asking for hundreds of thousands of dollars to be approved by shareholders to be pumped into every YCS. That's obviously a very like big chasm of what we're asking for compared to like, I'm better than 2,000 other people. I just got top 32 at this event. That's a massive achievement in any other game. But
Yep.
in Yu-Gi-Oh, it's like, here's a rubber mat. It just doesn't
Yeah,
taste
So,
no,
well.
I think, and that's what makes it. That's what overall makes it frustrating. Is like the problem isn't even that hard to fix. Like
yeah.
we like you've been saying, like alternate art, like staple cards, which wouldn't even hurt like the market or anything, right? Like
No.
the general player base wouldn't be hurt from like a special rarity Ash Blossom being given out because they still got all the other cards. Like it's not an exclusive card like with back in the day price cards, right? That were like competitive and exclusive to like shonen jumps, right? It's just like a different version of the card that's going to be super expensive. But
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah, it's like, let's be honest, the whole argument of prizing is going to improve Yu-Gi-Oh is pretty moot because I think like the fact that the majority of the competitive player base is still like the fact that the competitive player base is still this large and the tournament attendance is still as good as it is for the reward that you get. Like people want to play Yu-Gi-Oh because they want to play Yu-Gi-Oh because it's the
yeah,
best card game. I mean, I think that's why we're all here, right? Because we love this game and it's, there is no other card game that plays like Yu-Gi-Oh. And I think whether you have that nostalgia from when you first played it as a kid or you find that it, you know, triggers some neurons in your brain that no other card game does because you can just, play as many cards as you want in a turn without having to play a land or energy card, like great, cool. But yeah, like just doing something like alt arts, or I really like, I don't know, like how big of a fan you guys are. Anyone who's listening to this is like, I think the stamped cards that other games do are really cool too. Like that's
What is
just like
that?
an exclusive thing. Like they'll literally like foil stamp a card that it was like a prize card for like, so say like it's an Ash Blossom since we're on the theme. They would like foil stamp onto the Ash Blossom like top 32 into the corner of the artwork or something.
Mm.
So like that this was like
Personalize
the
it
prize
almost.
for top. Yeah, it is almost personalized. Or
yeah,
as you go up in the ranks, you get like a top 16 stamped Ash
Mhm.
Blossom. Or if you
yeah,
won, you get like champion Ash Blossom that there's like only one of, right? And then you can do that for each of the YCSs, or like you can even do that for regionals if you really wanted to.
yeah,
Just like little things like that. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. I think one thing that a lot of people in the retro Time Wizard format really hate is that if you top eight the Ultimate Time Wizard, which it cuts to top eight, it's 200 people typically, but you have to basically go X1, otherwise you don't top. Um, People really hate there that you get the same mat that is the retro mat that you get for just winning like a win-a-mat. So it's
mm,
right now it's like
yeah,
the hamster mat, or before it was the lad mat. They could easily just in the artwork put like a top 8 thing on there or something just to make it feel like a bit more special than like the mat that anyone else can get just for winning like a 16-man flight.
yeah.
It doesn't have to
Yeah.
be anything crazy. Going back to what you were saying though, Nadir, about with Pokemon comparing it to Yu-Gi-Oh. I feel like it's hard to make that comparison fairly because the majority of people like people who collect Pokemon and like don't like actually play Pokemon. Like there's this whole other angle to that game that I feel like it's like really hard to account for. Where Yu-Gi-Oh is like, yes, like people collect Yu-Gi-Oh, but people collect Pokemon. Like it's collector game first before anything, I feel like. So
Okay.
I don't know.
It's also just like, I mean, the IPs are not comparable in the slightest, right? Like Pokemon is massive in comparison to Yu-Gi-Oh, right?
For me, that
Yu-Gi-Oh is a
I
lot more
begs the
massive
question
than
why.
I would say Yu-Gi-Oh is a lot more massive than you would think, though. It's
It
like
is.
I'm pretty sure historically it's like in the top 20 most successful IPs of all time, or something like that. Which when
Yeah,
I
but like,
learned
where's
that, I was like
Pokemon then?
shocked.
Like, Pokemon is like top 3 or something then.
Oh yeah, Pokemon's like the top 3 or something, but like Yu-Gi-Oh
Yeah.
is a lot more popular than like
No,
people might
I
realize.
that might be true, but I still don't. I still think it's like compared to Pokemon, you would expect that if the trading card game sector like booms during COVID, like you would expect Pokemon to be the one that grows the most, right? That is like an expected outcome. Like that doesn't
Sure.
feel like fair to be like, hey, Yu-Gi-Oh, look, Pokemon's growing more than you. Like, oh yeah, yeah. Well, obviously, it's number. People in chat are saying it's even number one out of like those franchises.
I
Like,
would believe that.
see,
Yeah.
so yes, Yu-Gi-Oh is big, but Pokemon is bigger, like by a lot, I think.
Would there be anything that would have to be straw that broke the camel's back type of leave the game for you? Is there anything you would think that would have to happen that would just be like, oh no, I can't do this anymore?
Ooh.
The unbanned circular.
Not Block Dragon, I hope no.
I don't know. I always had this analogy that Yu-Gi-Oh is a lot like an abusive relationship where like we've
Well,
been
this is off to a
through-
good start.
we've like I think you'll understand what I'm getting at. I think you'll understand what I'm getting at.
Oh
We've
God!
as people who have played Yu-Gi-Oh for a very
Awesome
long
right
time.
there.
Yu-Gi-Oh has lows and it has a lot of lows. But I think when Yu-Gi-Oh peaks, I do not think any game comes close to like the dopamine rush you get from playing that game. And so I think we suffer through the bad formats, the bad business decisions, like the Yu-Gi-Oh is dying, like all this, so we can experience like peak Yu-Gi-Oh when it is really good. And so I think that's just like really hard to break because like it's funny if you think they released Yu-Gi-Oh today, there's like no way this game would survive. Like I'm sorry, it would not happen. It had to come out when it did because people just didn't know like any better at the time. And let's be honest, the anime did a lot of heavy lifting in selling it for a lot of people because it was just a giant ad for the card game. So you like people might be like, "Oh, why do you play this game if you complain about it all the time?" They always talk about like in game design now how they're always like trying to like prevent people from experiencing negative emotions because they fear it might like cause them to not want to play their game anymore. But I feel like you need to experience both ends of the emotional spectrum when playing a game because like then you like feel invested in it. Like then you like I remember like playing Halo and COD growing up, getting my ass kicked all the time and getting like livid, but like that fueled me to want to like get better and like keep playing. You know? So I don't know. Like there's
Like to be fair,
it's
like I've played other games as well, and that just feels like a very natural thing to happen in like these long time hobbies, long time like playing a certain game that is managed by a company that just releases new content over time, whether it's a card game or anything else where like new characters come out or whatever. Like that is something that I don't think I've played or experienced a game where that's not the case, where like there isn't ups and downs and people don't complain about certain decisions that are being made. Like whichever game you're playing currently, the fans are always saying like, oh, we've got the worst company ever out of all the games, you know? Like it that just feels like a very like human sort of thing, right?
Yeah, it's like the gaming industry's natural fan thing. I mean, League of Legends players absolutely hate their game. Overwatch players hate their
Yeah.
game. Like everyone hates
Yeah.
their game. But as Alex mentioned, like you have to experience the absolute euphoria of the peak of that game when it's at its absolute purest and best and most fun form. And because you have that memory, the nostalgia, or the experience of the game in its best mode, it's natural that your complaints, your frustrations are about trying to reattain that. Like we complain because we want it to be as good as we know it can be.
Yep. We complain because we care. Like that's what I've always said.
Exactly. Yeah. If no
So,
one
like,
complains, then it's because no one really cares about anything, right? There's a do whatever with your game. I don't care.
exactly. And I think they always say like that's the worst reaction you can get is if like there's no reaction. And so the fact that right now, especially because there's the whole Yu-Gi-Oh is dying discourse, regardless of which side of the argument you fall on, because so many people are screaming into the void their opinions, it's because they love the game and they care about the game and they want to keep playing or experiencing that. So
See, guys, shifters at 3 because they care about us. They want us to care. That's why shifters at 3.
Yeah, so we're near about reaching the end of usually when we wrap this up. Mostly because I want to get food and watch the football. It's
Oh, I missed it. Did we win?
Yeah, you did.
Did we win?
Well done. So yeah, any other like last topics or anything you
we
felt
won.
like
Okay,
you wanna
we won. Okay.
you wanna bring up? I just told you you did.
Oh, I didn't listen.
Natural. Yeah, is there anything else that you feel like you wanna bring up or talk about that feels relevant or anything else?
not that I could think of. No,
I know
we covered,
we
covered
always
a
go,
lot.
Yeah, we always go into this with guests, unless like there's like a specific niche that I think the guest fulfills. We usually just just talk about like general topics of the game.
Run it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just vibe. Yeah, no, this has been fun. I appreciate you guys
that was
having me
fun.
on. I
Yeah,
always
it's
love
been
talking about this stuff.
Been a blast, as always, and I can't wait to do more collabs again, man. Like you're the collab guy. Like that's you.
Well, you and I were cooking up something before I left for my trip, so we'll see if that comes to fruition. There's the spoiler for your chat. Okay.
Yeah. All right. Well, if you for whatever somehow don't know who Cimo is, socials in the description as always.
I'm a very small Yugi tuber. I would appreciate your subscription.
We're trying to help him out here. I think he has more subs than both of us here combined, which is fantastic.
That's not even close, I don't think.
So yeah, thanks guys for tuning in as always. Follow us on all of the various forms of social media, specifically the Spotify and on Apple Podcasts, because we're trying to grow that as much as possible. Just you don't need to watch this specifically just on YouTube, because we don't usually display as many visuals. Yeah, working on our best to improve the quality where possible. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and Alex, sign out.
Peace.
Bye everyone. Take care.